Essential NLP. Practical skills for a great life. Hi, and a very warm welcome from me, your host, Phil Parker, to this, the very first podcast in Essential Skills of NLP. This is one of 10 free podcasts, which you can listen to for free as many times as you wish to. If you like it and you want to get the rest of them, you can buy them directly from the iTunes store. Just search for Phil Parker or Essential NLP. Podcast number 1. This podcast series has been designed so you can learn as much as possible about the fascinating world of NLP. I'll be talking you through it. I'm Phil Parker, and I've been working in this field for over 25 years, and my speciality is working with NLP in all sorts of areas. I work with peak performers, athletes, explorers, business people, and I also focus a lot on health and looking at the fascinating world of the mind-body connection. And NLP is a really brilliant way to look at these things. So pretty much whatever you're interested in terms of NLP, I've got some really interesting ideas, answers for you, and probably some life-changing questions. One of the most important things I've found in my work with NLP is that there's a massive variety in the way people teach it and approach it. And the way I like to approach it is to consider that NLP is almost like a manual for the brain that we never got given. I like to make NLP really easy, really simple, really practical, and to keep it real. So this podcast series is not going to be happy, clappy, airy-fairy stuff. It's going to be, how can you take these reasonable, practical tools and start to put them into practice to make a difference in your life and affect other people's lives in a positive way. So it's very practical, very easy, very simple, very effective, and real. So where do we begin? Well, first of all, what's in it for you? I hope you'll be joining me over the next few weeks and months listening to this. I think you can learn a lot about NLP through things like this podcast. There are great NLP books out there. I've even written a few of them, but there's a limit to how much you can learn from materials like this. You also need to use it, and you need to learn it in an environment where you've got somebody helping you out, showing you what's right or how you could do it better. So just remember, this isn't a substitute for a course. If you want a good course, then email me. I run great courses at my training institute, but there are other places around the world that I can also recommend. But this podcast is going to be a great starting point for you if you're new to NLP, or if you're already involved in NLP, you'll find it a really good refresher for what you know already, and hopefully will teach you some new stuff as well. NLP is one of those fascinating areas that when you delve into it, the more you hear other people's approaches, the more experienced you become and the better a practitioner you are. So welcome wherever you are in your NLP journey. In this podcast, I want to begin by giving you a bit of an overview about what's possible, giving you a few exercises to do, dipping in and out of a whole range of NLP techniques so that we can work out why this is worth listening to, why it's worth pursuing. And then in subsequent podcasts, we'll be looking in much more detail at some specific techniques and approaches. So let's begin with a couple of things. If you want to, you can do a nice variation of this exercise using a video camera or a webcam and just video your face whilst you do the exercise. But you can come back to that later. For the moment, you don't need to have a video camera set up for this. What I'd like you to do is answer this question. What is your postcode or your zip code backwards? And do this without writing it down. Now, when you try and answer that question, a very interesting set of things occur. For most people, it's a question they've never been asked before. We of course know it forwards, to one degree or another, but pretty much in no other context apart from the courses that I teach are we ever asked this question, what is it backwards? So we suddenly find ourselves set with a task to create new neurological patterns, because the postcode is something that's stored sequentially from beginning to end, and we've never been asked to repeat it backwards, so there's no neurology to do this for us. So when you're asked to say it backwards, you instantly struggle to create a good bit of new neurology that can bring this information out for you, because it's not stored or viewed in this way usually. For many of you, you'll notice it's a bit of a struggle. You may find yourself trying to draw it in the air in front of you, or trying to see it backwards in your head, or sounding it out backwards. feels a bit like a very clunky machine trying to process something. And initially, for most people, you won't be that successful at doing it. It tends to be stuttery, slow, a little bit unreliable. And you can feel that effort and energy is being expended in trying to make it happen. Often, if you watch a video of yourself whilst you're doing this, you can see your eyes flickering around. You can see your body almost contorting to try and drag out the information. And because NLP is all about change, it's really useful to experience this, to feel what change feels like. What you are doing here is you're trying to create those new pathways. And this is exactly what people will be doing when they use NLP to change things they've been stuck with for years. The next thing I'd like you to do is to repeat this exercise a few times, getting really familiar with saying your postcode backwards. Normally it takes most people 4 to 10 times, but after repeating it enough times, you'll suddenly find that you can quite fluently repeat your postcode backwards. And at that point, what you've got is not only new neurological pathways, but pathways that are robust and efficient. And you can notice that with the speed. Change happens very rapidly. And NLP looks at how do we access the ability we all have to make rapid change. Now, some people will tell you change takes a long time. It takes a long time for the brain to learn. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And yet there's lots of examples where that's just not true. Let's imagine we take the example of someone who's going out with a guy called John. They're in love with John, and every time they hear his name or think about him, they feel happy. They imagine fluffy clouds, lovely kittens, and then one day they come home a little bit early to find John in bed with a next door neighbour whose name is Roger. They're quite surprised about this because this was definitely not the arrangement they had with John. Instantly, in the moment they come home and they find their boyfriend in bed with another man, which wasn't the part of the plan, suddenly their feelings about John and the name John are transformed immediately. How long does it take for this change to occur? Milliseconds. And from now on, whenever they think about John, they don't see fluffy clouds and kittens. Instead, they're greeted with a very different experience than they used to have. So we know change happens in a moment. Now, hopefully none of you have been in that very particular situation, but most of us have an experience where we're in love with someone, we feel warm feelings towards them, and then it changes. If that relationship suddenly ends, not on a good note, our feelings about their name and them as a person change instantly. So change happens in a moment, and yet we see people all the time who are stuck with problems they've had for years. They've been trying lots of things, but they don't seem to be able to change them. And yet we know change is possible, change is rapid. So what is missing? Well, what's missing are effective tools that make that change possible. And that's what NLP provides. A really good understanding of what you need to do to make change. What you need to do to create new neurology that takes your brain in a different and more useful way to get the kind of life you want to have. So we're going to be exploring these kind of things. I'd like to think of another thing now, and this is timelines. Most people are familiar with timelines from history books, such as the timeline that represents the history of the American Revolution. For a moment, I'd like you to think about your personal timeline. Imagine if your past was a line, as you think about it, which direction does it go in? Now, for most people, it will be somewhere off to the left or possibly behind them. That's the most usual position to have it in. It doesn't matter if it's somewhere else, but just notice where it is. And then, when you think about where your future is, where's your future heading off to? For most people, the future is in the front of them or to their right. When you consider your timeline, there are a number of interesting things about this. The first is, most people aren't aware they even had a personal timeline until we had this conversation with them. Then, as soon as they answer the question, they become aware they have got one, and they realize they've always had it. They're very clear it's to the left or it's in front of them. Notice what happens when you picture your future line and you colour it in bright, sparkling colours and lighten it up. For most people, just making this one simple change makes the future seem more exciting, more alluring, more attractive. That's quite amazing, really, when you think about it. something you didn't even know you had, can have such an impact on how you feel just by changing the colour of it. NLP is fascinated by these kind of things. It loves to explore them, the nature of how we see the world. Because if we can understand how we see the world, then we can start to see if we're perceiving it in the most useful way possible. Or maybe it's time to choose to see it in a more beneficial way that moves our lives forwards. So there's so many fascinating things you're going to discover about yourself and about how you operate that you probably never even thought about, never even considered. And that might open up some new, really useful avenues for you to look at and to make change in, and equally to explore with others. So it's going to be quite an adventure looking at how our brain works, how we can get ourselves stuck, how we can get to be brilliant, and how we can learn to replicate our genius behaviours everywhere. There's much to do, and what I'm going to be covering in the next podcast is two very important topics. Rapport, which is how we create great relationships with people, and so is essential to pretty much anything we do, and exploring the vital concept of states. States are when we activate a whole set of neurology that makes us feel a particular way. So that could be the state of being confident, being emotional, being angry, being upset, being on top of the world, being empowered, and so on. We'll be looking at how states work and how we can make them work for us. Just those two topics that I'll cover in the next podcast could completely change what's possible for you and how you see the world. So I look forward to speaking to you again in the next podcast, and hope you've enjoyed this very brief introduction to what we'll be covering throughout the series. Please email me, phil@philparker.org, so you can get a transcript of this. It's completely free. And I really look forward to connecting up with you guys and helping you learn all the skills so that you can start to live a life you love. Until next time. Remember, the full series is on iTunes. Just search for Phil Parker and Essential Skills of NLP. If you wish to sign up for our mailing list, please visit philparker.org. There you'll get free bonus content, transcripts, and information about forthcoming books and seminars related to this topic that might be really interesting for you.